Hello, beautiful people. This is Dr. Mika Stewart, here to talk to you today about race. Now, in this lecture, I'm going to try to define race. And defining race can be really tricky because race is often viewed by people who haven't taken sociology as something that's purely biological. Like based in the color of your skin, like do you have beautiful brown skin like me, the texture of your hair, the shape of your nose, the shape of your eyes, those kinds of things. And many people look at those things to determine race, and they think that race is biologically based. Well, as sociologists, we don't really take that approach. What we say that race is a social construct. Race is a social construct. And if you think about the word construct, or if you pronounce it differently, construct, basically that's something that you create. That's something that you make. That's something that you build. And so to say that race is a social construct means that our society determines, our society defines or builds or creates the definition of race. And this definition of race changes across time. In fact, I'm sending you the link to a very interesting article, and it talks about how the census has defined people across time. So the first census that was taken in 1790. And at that time, we had basically three categories. We had free white male and free white female. That was one. And then we had all other free persons and slaves. Okay? Now, you will not normally hear me use the word slaves to refer to people because that is a dehumanizing term. I will say enslaved persons. But nevertheless, just for the sake of this lecture in quoting the census, I'm using the terms that they actually use. So that was the first census. And then over the course of time, different categories get introduced. So for example, it was in 1870 that we first introduced the Chinese. And so that was a new category. And then we introduced Mexicans in 1930. And then, let's see, in 1970, we expanded it. And we had other ethnic groups underneath. It wasn't just for Latino, it wasn't just Mexican. We had people from other Central and Southern American countries, as well as people from other countries, not just China. So we had Japan and different places. So it's really, really fascinating, I think, if you just kind of look at how our government has classified people over time. And one of the things that you might notice is that essentially we have made changes, we've added groups, but one group that we really haven't added as its own separate group is Middle Easterners. And they are a significant portion of our population. Well, if you really want to understand the social significance of race, it's very fascinating, I think anyway, to review the history of the Arab Americans in the United States. Because initially they had petitioned to be considered white because in 1882 the government instituted the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was this very racist policy that said anybody from China, no workers from China can come to the United States anymore. And then they also created laws to really restrict immigration from Asian countries. And anybody that was here that was from an Asian country, they could not gain citizenship. So the Arab Americans that were here, who had initially been classified as Asian, said, no, we're not Asian, we are white. And so there was, various groups, were trying to get the classification as white so that they could become citizens and wouldn't have to worry about possibly being deported. It's really interesting. There's an article that you might want to read, and I will post it, and it's called Not Quite White, and Race Classification and the Arab American Experience. And I think it's very interesting. Of course, I love sociology, so of course I think that, right? But in any case, in this article, it talks about how, yes, in 1909, the Arab Americans petitioned to be considered white so that they could get that citizenship status. And when one particular case went to court, the man who was, making the petition to be considered white, his lawyer used the argument that he was from the same place that Jesus was from. And so if this man couldn't be considered white, well, then Jesus wasn't white. And we cannot have a non-white Jesus. And so he did get granted the status of white. Fast forward until 2016, and now there's another move by many within the Arab American community to be classified as non-white, especially after 9/11 and all of the racism and the discrimination and the hate crimes that have been committed against people from the Middle East. And so now there is a move for the 2020 census to have a category MENA, which is Middle Eastern and North African. So this will be very interesting. So prior to this, if you were from a European country, a Middle Eastern country, or a North African country, you were to classify as white. So if in 2020, if it changes, and if you are from a European country, you classify as white, but if you're from a Middle Eastern country, or a North African country, or an Arab nation, then you classify as Middle Eastern, North African. So that'll be very interesting to see if that actually pans out. But that just kind of tells you the social construction of race. One more example. This is another way I like to think about it. If you get on the plane in the United States and you get on the plane as a woman and you fly across the world to another country, when you get off the plane, you will still be a woman. If you get on the plane in the United States as a particular race and you get off the plane halfway across the world, you don't know what race you'll be because that society may classify people differently. Okay, so hopefully I've explained enough about what the social construction of race is. All right, so that's race. One more thing I wanted to tell you. If you like to read fiction, which I love to read fiction, and I know from my classes, I see some of my students reading in class. Well, not in class. No, not in class, but on their break. Yes, on their break. I see students reading, and there is a wonderful short story by Langston Hughes, and it's called Who's Passing for Who? And again, it just kind of goes with this whole notion of the social construction of race. And this is on an individual scale. So, how the government classifies us, that's more on a macro level. But how we interact with people based on what we perceive their race to be, that's on a micro level. So if you are looking for a good short story, then that's a great one to read. And I'll also give you the link to that story so you can read that. Okay, so we've got that. We've got race, a racial category. It's set apart from others because of so-called obvious differences, but we do realize that race is a social construct, and we distinguish race from ethnicity, okay? Ethnicity. So we could say that race has to do with your continent of origin. So we would say you are Asian if you are from any of the countries within the Asian continent. But your ethnicity would be Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, okay? Indian. Now, just to confuse things here, sometimes people that are Pacific Islanders have been classified as Asian, and sometimes they get classified separately. So, again, the whole race thing and the whole classification thing can be a little bit tricky in sociology. So, if you're looking a little bit confused, don't worry. It can be a little bit confusing. But if you just think of ethnicity as being, again, your country of origin, and the place where you have distinctive cultural patterns. And remember, language is the carrier of culture. So in China, they don't speak the same language that they speak in Japanese. They don't, in Japan. They don't have the same history. They don't look alike, despite the fact that many of our television shows will put many different Asians of different ethnicities into one program and call it a family. And we're not supposed to know that they're from various ethnic groups, because all minorities look alike. There have actually been research studies that show that people that are not part of a particular group have a hard time seeing the distinctions between people of a group that they're not a part of. So yes, it's not uncommon for anybody who's not Asian to think that all Asians look alike, or somebody who's not African American to think that all African Americans look alike. So, you know, it is somewhat of a racist statement, but there actually is research to show that people do have a harder time distinguishing traits or characteristics when they're not part of that group. Okay, now let's go on to what is a minority. Okay, what is a minority? Now, when we use the term minority in everyday speech, we tend to think of the fewest, right? You know, the majority wins, that means the most. Well, in sociology, minority and majority have nothing to do with numbers, okay? Nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with power. You can be in the numeric majority and be considered a minority. So for example, South Africa, under the apartheid system, was the black Africans were in the numeric majority, but they were disenfranchised. They did not have political power, they did not have social power. And so they were the minority, even though there were more of them. In our country, women are in the numeric majority. There are more women in this country than there are men. Yet, we have not ever had a woman president. We thought we might this year in 2016, but that did not happen. And so the fact that women still have less power politically, still earn less money economically, and still encounter other kinds of issues and problems socially, shows us that women are also a minority. So let's go through the 5 characteristics or the 5 traits of minority, or what it takes to be classified as a minority. Okay, number 1, minorities experience unequal treatment. Okay, unequal treatment. Not unequal as in, ooh, we're privileged. No, unequal as in worse. One commonly used measure of this is pay. Okay, so going back to women, women earn, at this particular time in history, about 79 to 80 cents for every dollar that a man earns. People of color earn significantly less than European American males, who earn the most in our country. So there's minorities experience unequal treatment. Number 2 is they share physical or cultural characteristics. So we would say women share physical characteristics, and then let's say if we're talking about a racial minority, we might say that they share some physical characteristics, or maybe an ethnic minority, some cultural characteristics. They might speak the same language, for example. Number 3, minorities are grouped based on their ascribed status. Ascribed, as you recall, means that you're born into the group. You don't choose it. I mean, I didn't wake up one day and say, you know, I think I will be brown today. I just came out like this. Let's see. Number 4, minorities have a strong sense of group solidarity. So sometimes minorities see themselves as part of whatever that group is, whatever that subordinate group that they are in. Many people get their identity or strongly identify with that group. And then 5th is that minorities often marry within, a practice known as endogamy. Endogamy the word or the suffix gami has to do with marriage, and indo with N. So people marry within their own race or ethnicity. And currently, within the United States, about 90% of people marry within their own race or ethnicity. 90%. Some of you may be surprised by that because you're like, wait a minute, I've dated, everybody under the rainbow. But this is California, and California is not the rest of the country. We have so many options to choose from here, but in the Midwest, they don't have as many options. It's just not the same. So if we look at the country as a whole, what we find is that most people do actually marry within their own racial or ethnic group. And even some of you who may say, I've dated outside my group, I've dated, right now I'm dating, somebody that's not a part of my ethnic or racial group, but that's still dating. Will you marry that person? That's the question. And sometimes people, when they're dating, find that they get so much flack from their families, or it just becomes too much of a hassle. One family accepts, the other family doesn't, that they're like, you know what, this is just too stressful. So they go ahead and marry within their own race or ethnicity. Okay, so the other term that has to do with marrying within your own group, it's not just endogamy, the other term is homogamy. So H-O-M-O has to do with the same, and again, gamy has to do with marriage. So you're marrying someone who's very similar to you. Now when you marry outside the group, okay, if endogamy means marrying with N, then to marry out would be, that's right, exogamy, like your ex, the person who's out of your life, or supposedly out of your life. Sometimes they creep back in, but supposedly out. Or heterogamy, okay? That would be marrying someone who's different than you. So maybe a different race, or, you're 20 years apart in age, or, one of you's really rich, the other's really poor. That doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does. Okay, now, minorities are also classified as subordinate groups, okay, subordinate groups. And so some examples of different types of minorities, well, obviously, racial minorities, okay, ethnic minorities. We have religious minorities. Christianity is the dominant religion in the United States. So if you are not practicing Christianity, or maybe not even practicing, but claiming, okay, I'll use the word claiming Christianity as your religion, then you would be a religious minority. And probably our most visible, okay, right now are members of the Islamic faith. And so are people who practice Islam, do they experience unequal treatment? Oh yeah. Do they share physical or cultural characteristics? Cultural characteristics, and that religious practices are cultural practices. Number 3, are they grouped based on their ascribed statuses? Well, yes, for most of us, the religion that we practice is the religion that we were born into, although in the United States we do get to choose. Is there a strong sense of group solidarity? Yes, there definitely is. And do people marry within? And the answer to that would be, again, yes. Because one of the functions of religious institutions is to provide a meeting ground so that people will meet and marry people of the same faith. And studies show that when people of the same faith marry, then their relationship tends to be stronger. Not necessarily a particular faith, but just the same faith. So that you don't have the big argument of, well, it's Saturday, time to go to temple. What? Temple? No, we need to go play ball and we'll just go to church tomorrow. No, church, what are you talking about? So it becomes an issue, especially when you have kids. All right. So we have subordinate group. We said we have religious minorities, racial, ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, okay? People who are LGBT experience unequal treatment, yes. Do they share physical or cultural characteristics? That one's a little bit tricky because, people are just people. So, that one's a little bit harder. 3, are they grouped based on their ascribed status? Yes. People do not choose their sexual orientation. I know for some of you that's going to be news, but this is something that all of our major associations, American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, American Sociological Association, Psychological Association, have all determined that we do not choose our sexual orientation. And if you think about it, think about your own sexual orientation, whatever it is. And can you look in your history and pick a time when you decided that you would be attracted to whoever it is that you're attracted to? I mean, I can't think of a time in my history. I just remember in 2nd grade, I fell in love with Tony. That was his name. And he used to play his imaginary guitar for me during recess. Oh. But I didn't say, well, will I pick Tony or Tammy? I didn't say that. It was just Tony for me, and it's been Tony's and his brothers ever since. So I can't think of a time that I chose, and if you think about it, you can't probably think of a time that you chose either, because we don't choose that. So it's ascribed. And then have a strong sense of group solidarity. Yes, again, most oppressed groups do find themselves coming together because there's strength in numbers. And often marry within. Well, this is the ultimate marrying within. Now that the laws have changed, ever since June 26, 2015, people who are same gender loving have been allowed to marry in the United States. Okay, so let's see. Then we also have the elderly. The elderly are minorities. And we have people who are differently able. They would be considered minorities. Okay. Now, here's the another thing to think about when we're talking about minorities and subordinate groups. Not all people, even though they are minority, experience the same type of struggles. Okay. Because you can have more than one subordinate group. You can be African American and you can be a woman. And so that's 2 subordinate statuses. And that's what we call double jeopardy. Okay? Double jeopardy. This has nothing to do with not being able to be charged with the same crime. Okay? This has nothing to do with crime. Although sometimes it seems as though being a minority in the U.S. is a crime. But that's not true. Okay, so double jeopardy has nothing to do with crime, but it does have to do with having 2 subordinate statuses. So the example I used was being a woman and African American. Okay, let's say that you were an elderly African American woman. That would be 3 subordinate statuses. Okay, and that's what we call triple jeopardy. Triple jeopardy. Okay, now let's say that you are an elderly African American woman who is Muslim and blind and lesbian. Yeah, that's 6 subordinate statuses. And at that point, we just say, "Ooh, bless your heart," because that's going to be some hard living, okay? So that's what we call multiple jeopardy. So we usually say double and then triple, and then after that we just say multiple, because you just got it coming at you from all different sides. Hang in there if that's you. Okay. Now, on my tests, I like to ask you questions about the superlatives, so the greatest, the least, right? So make sure you know those. If I were to ask you, what is the largest minority group, Okay, largest minority category, what would you say? Did you say you would say women? If you did, you've got it right, because I didn't have any qualifier. I just said minority. And so that's the largest minority category is women. If I were to say what's the largest racial minority, then you would say, that's right, African American. But if I were to say what's the largest ethnic minority, okay, so this is the largest group of people from a particular ethnicity, then we would say Hispanic or Latino. All right, so let's take a minute to talk about this, because this can be a little bit tricky too. Hispanic is the term that the U.S. government uses, okay? And it has nothing to do with race. Hispanic has to do with, it's a broad catch-all term. It's to represent anybody from any of the Latin American countries. It's actually a pan-ethnic term. Pan means we put a whole bunch together, okay? So, because technically to be Hispanic, you can be from Colombia, you can be from, Mexico, you can be from South America, you can be from, Guatemala. So all of those places are different countries, different history, different customs, same language, okay? And so they all get grouped under the category of Hispanic. Then, which is a pan-ethnic term because it's a whole bunch together. Just like the term Asian American, which actually did not come into usage in the United States till like the 1960s. We had the Civil Rights Movement, and then it was like, hey, we would maybe be stronger if we kind of united and saw our interests as similar, even though we have different histories and different languages and different customs. Again, here they just see us all as one, so we might as well join together and kind of present a united front. And it was in the 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement, the era of social unrest and change, that the term Asian American was first used, which is, again, a pan-ethnic term, because we're referring to Chinese and Japanese and Taiwanese and Indians. And so we're referring to people from so many different ethnic groups. So it's a pan-ethnic term. So the largest ethnic minority, or technically pan-ethnic minority, would be Hispanic, to use the government's term. On the West Coast, we tend to say Latino. And then if you ask somebody who's Latino or Hispanic, they will probably tell you what their actual country is. So they might say, oh, I'm Mexican American, or I'm Cuban, or I'm Colombian. So, okay, so we have race, we have ethnicity, we have just minority. So if you should see these questions on a test, I'm just saying, be sure to look for the qualifier. What am I asking? Am I asking the largest minority, the largest racial minority, the largest ethnic minority? And if I were to ask you, what is the largest racial group? Okay, hopefully you got it. I didn't say anything about minority, so that's going to be our European Americans. Again, European American, we say that's the racial category, but the different ethnicities, that would be the ethnic groups. So are you from Italy? Are you from Germany? Are you from Scandinavia? Are you from Russia? Those would be all of the different ethnic groups. Again, different languages, different histories, different migration patterns to the United States. Okay, whew, there's a lot here. It's so fascinating though. Okay, so let's talk about, again, this whole idea of the social construction of race. It was in 2000 that the U.S. government allowed people to classify